today, I've got to be honest, I'm really excited, okay? I've been thinking about this series for a while, and for a long time I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know, what should I call it? What's kind of the idea behind it? I know what scriptures God wants us to go through. I know what we need to look at, and this last year has really shown me that we need to look at, in a very real way, how do we thrive when the entire culture around us is trying to pull us down or pull us back, or is trying to discourage our faith, or is trying to do any of these things. So I've been looking at, how is it that we're supposed to thrive? How are we supposed to make a difference? How are we supposed to exist in a hostile world? Because if we're all downright honest, things right now are not great, right? I mean, I saw so many things on Facebook in the last week about, thank God 2016 is almost over. Let's pray that 2017 is better. In fact, there's been so many celebrity deaths that have happened that there was actually a fund started to help keep Betty White alive for the remainder of 2016. It's just everybody's like, holy cow, There's been everything in the last year from, the numerous terrorist attacks that continue to happen all over the world, to celebrities dying, to family members passing away, to just trials, to the entire mess of an election. And I think everybody on both sides of the spectrum can agree it was a horrible mess, and it was just dirty and everything else. And the country now is in many ways divided more than it's been in a very long time. And we've got, people targeting and shooting cops. We got riots, we got this, we got that, and all of this stuff. And we're just sitting here going, how in the world are we even supposed to thrive? And a lot of us get in this kind of mode where we go, you know what, I can survive anything. I can get into survival mode, and you put me out in the woods with just a knife, and I can find a way to survive, at least for a while. Okay? And people do this all the time. They can get into a survival mode where they provide for their needs, they get shelter, they get food, and they learn to just survive, and their entire world is all about surviving. Surviving is I don't want to say surviving is easy, because depending on the circumstances, even that can be very difficult. But surviving is easy for us for the most part. We can survive. Our minds can come into where it turns off certain parts, and we don't think about certain things, or we just do what we have to in order to survive. We've got that instinct within us of fight or flight. So in order to survive, we will either choose to stand and fight something, or we'll choose to run away, And that's kind of, we can do that. We can survive. We can make that kind of decision. But how do you thrive? I mean, when everyone else around you is just surviving, how do we thrive? I mean, and just think about it a little bit, okay? How many people are dealing with drug addictions? How many people are dealing with alcoholism? How many people are dealing with any of the other number of issues that are strictly related to trying to cope with this world? That's all those things are. It's trying to get yourself out of the world you find yourself in. How are we supposed to thrive in a hostile world? How do we do that? How do we survive? How do we thrive? And so we're going to look at, we're going to take the next couple of weeks, and we're going to be looking at the story of Daniel. And I'm really excited about this, because Daniel was thrown into the worst imaginable circumstance. You think your life is rough right now, just wait till I tell you the beginning part of Daniel. Okay, because Daniel finds himself in this incredibly difficult, incredibly painful situation. He finds himself in a city, in a culture led by a king that is completely hostile to everything he stands for, to everything he believes in, everything that he identified with, and he feels it being stripped away. And it's this painful experience that he goes through. And I want us to look at, because the incredible thing about Daniel is he ends up in this horrible environment, yet he thrives more than anybody else. I mean, he thrives better in a dangerous environment, in a dangerous culture. He thrives better than some of the native-born people there. So how do you take the stuff of Daniel and how do we live like him? How do we thrive like Daniel did? So we're gonna look at this because Daniel had some things that were taken away from him. In a lot of ways, we can identify with that. You might not identify with all of them. You might identify with absolutely every single one of them and feel the pain of it and feel the stress of it and all of it. And you're trying to figure out, how do I keep going? How do I keep going? And I honestly believe if we will live like Daniel, we will learn to thrive in a hostile world. I honestly do. I honestly do. So we're going to read the first part of Daniel chapter 1. I'm going to have it up on the screen here just a sec. But I want to give you a little bit of a background on what's happening just in history, okay? If you come in and you just read the beginning part of the story, you're not going to fully understand exactly what's happening because the story is so much broader, so much bigger in the whole story of Scripture. So Daniel is a young man, okay? He's probably about 14 years old, okay? So he's young at the beginning of this story. He's a young man, and he is a Hebrew. He lives in the nation of Israel, okay? And he is of a tribe called Judah. That was the royal tribe of the kings. So King David was from that tribe. Solomon was from that tribe. All of these great kings were from the tribe of Judah, and Daniel was actually a descendant of the kings. So he's got royal blood in him. He's this kind of, one of those ones born into privilege a little bit, born into royalty, and things are good at home for Daniel. Okay, he's got a good family, he's got all this, but the problem is the nation that he lives in has turned their back on God completely. And they've gone through such a long period of rebellion where they've rebelled against God and they've turned away from Him and they've done all this, that now God has finally said, okay. And He prophesies to them and He says, you know what? I'm going to allow an enemy to come in and burn your cities and take your people hostage and do all of this. And this was prophesied beforehand. Like God told them, hey, this is what's going to happen because of how you're acting. And nothing changed, which is sad. But Daniel, we can see just by watching his life that it's clear that the family he was born into were still trying to be faithful to God. Even though not everything was great, they were still teaching the right things. They were still leading and doing all this with their family. And they were working on it. They were trying to make it good, trying to teach Daniel. And Daniel learned some things, and then it all gets stripped away. So let's look at Daniel chapter 1. We're going to read several passages there just to see what happens at the beginning of Daniel's story. So what happens? Daniel chapter 1, okay? It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, and some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. I want to just stop right there. See, we're going to see a process where Daniel has certain things taken away from him. Okay? In Jerusalem, they had the temple built by arguably the greatest king of Israel, Solomon. He at least was the richest king. And they had all of these things for the house of God. They made it incredibly detailed, incredibly beautiful. I mean, there was gold and silver and jewels and we would be just awestruck by looking at this because of the craftsmanship, because of the cost. It was just incredible. And we see that the holy city of Jerusalem, where the house of God resides, that's where everyone would go to worship. That's where the priests were. That's where you would go and make sacrifices and all of this. It was a cornerstone of their faith. And all of a sudden, God allows it to be taken? Like, what happened? And not only that, but Nebuchadnezzar comes in and takes some of the items from the house of God, some of the items that were used for sacrifices and this and that, and takes them. And we see in other passages, because remember, the Bible is multiple books all composed, and they tell the same story. So we see in other passages in the book of Kings and in Chronicles where Nebuchadnezzar actually goes into the house of God and he takes the items and cuts them up into pieces and then takes them and puts them in the treasury of his God. I mean, holy cow, you know. So immediately, just like that, Daniel's entire belief system is completely rocked. All the things they had, all of the instruments they used for worship and all of the items that were used to help with worship and sacrifice and all of this, they're gone. The house of God has been ransacked. And on top of that, you believe that your God is the only true God, and He's allowed this to happen? Like, we sit there and get upset when someone we love dies, and we say, God, how could you let this happen? Imagine having your entire city besieged, the house of God that you worship in ransacked and plummeted, or plundered, I guess, and everything taken, and people died, and all of this, and you're standing there going, God, what happened? So his entire belief system has been wrecked. And a lot of us can identify with this. If you've been a Christian for a long time, you can look around and see that, man, our belief system is being stretched. Like, it's not really a good thing now to go around and tell people you're a Christian. It's not accepted the way it used to be. In the past, it was like, hey, are you a Christian? Well, you don't even ask that question because everybody was a Christian. It was just how it was. Everybody went to church. Everybody did all of these things. And today, it's not that way. And we can sit here and we can go, oh, I wish it would go back to that way. I wish it would go back to that way. But the reality of it is everything has changed. It is no longer the norm to go around and say, I love Jesus and I serve Him wholeheartedly. That's no longer the norm. That's not normal anymore. And in fact, in a lot of circles and a lot of places, that's frowned upon in a big way. Now, it's fine for you to look and say, you know what, I like Jesus, I do. And everyone will look at you and say, I do too. But the moment you say, I try to serve Him wholeheartedly and I believe everything He says, I believe the Scriptures, and I do all of this, all of a sudden people start backing away from you because it's socially unacceptable now. That's what it's beginning. We can look and say, God, our belief system has begun to break down. It's not what it used to be. And one note on that, because Daniel's the one who was writing this. Notice how Daniel at the very beginning says, God allowed this to happen. So even though his entire belief system was rocked in a big way, he's sitting there saying, hey, God's still in charge. The way things have changed, but God hasn't. Just remember that. Okay, as you look and you say, man, you know, the country's going downhill, our belief system isn't what it used to be, just remember that God is still completely in control. That's one of the things that Daniel had to do to thrive, was to remember who was in charge. But let's continue to look and see what else was stripped away. We see that his religious system, his belief system was stripped away, was broken from what it used to be. It was broken away. But let's look and see what else happens, because that's not the only thing that happens that gets taken away from Daniel. He gets a lot more taken away from him. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competence to stand in the king's palace and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Now, you might say, all right, well, what does all that mean? Daniel was one of those kids. Daniel was smart. He had a bright future. He had all these things. And all of a sudden, the king who just came in and ransacked the house of the God that you worship and cut up all the vessels and took them away, all of a sudden he goes and says, hey, bring all them here. They're going to work for me. So Daniel, and the home that he's known, the home he's grown up in with his family, we don't know if his parents went. There's no indication that they did. All we know is Daniel was taken. And they began the learning process. In the Babylonian culture, they would begin the schooling for children at about the age of 13 or 14. So we can rightly imagine that that's about the age of Daniel at this time. 13, 14, and he's taken from his home. His entire home has been stripped away. And now he lives in the palace of a king who serves a different God, who has different morals, different ethics. The Babylonians were not nice people. Okay? They were brutal, harsh people. And he finds himself serving there. All of a sudden, it's stripped away. His entire home has been stripped away. And not only that, but he's not even, most of us would sit there and say, he's still a child. He's not even old enough to understand what's happening. But he's taken from his home and taken away. But it doesn't stop there. That's the hard thing. First, his religious beliefs, religious system is shattered when Nebuchadnezzar comes in, and then he's taken hostage, taken out of the land. And here's the hard thing. There is no indication that he ever went home. Ever. That he ever went back. There's no indication of that. So we sit there and we say, his home was completely changed, was completely stripped from him, and he's taken away. Now, in our lives, a lot of us can sit here and say, this country that we call home has changed so much I don't even recognize it. Since when are people killing cops? You know? Since when is the nation so incredibly divided? Since when do people, I know it's been happening for a while, but people burning flags, stepping on them, doing all this. And we can sit here and we can say, our nation has changed. It doesn't feel like it used to. It doesn't feel like the way it used to. And we can sit there and, again, if we allow ourselves, we can have that longing within us to say, I want that back. There's so many times that you find people who say, I wish it was like it was back in the 80s, back in the 70s, the 60s, 50s, whenever your ideal time period was. We can sit there and longingly look back and say, I wish it was like that now. And I wish, and nothing will ever be good again because we won't go back to that. And we can sit there and get into this almost a depression because things have changed so much. They've got metal detectors in schools. Holy cow. All of these things that we sit there and we go, why can't it be like it used to be? Why can't it be the way it was? Now, here's what Daniel could have done, okay? He's had the temple that he worshipped at was ransacked, was destroyed, and all of a sudden now he's stripped from his family, taken away. Daniel could have very easily fallen into such a deep depression, longing to go back home, such homesickness, and that would be natural for a while, but he could have chosen to stay in that state of mind and say, you know what, it's horrible, nothing is ever going to be good again, nothing is going to be right again, all of these things are falling apart. If only I was back in Jerusalem, everything would be right. He could have that kind of mindset, and a lot of times we get that. We wish that things would just go back to the way it was. But here's the reality. For Daniel, Jerusalem was gone. It had been ransacked. A few years after he was taken, it would be burned to the ground. And we've got to realize that the past that we love, while the memories of it might be wonderful and cherished and all of this, it's gone. And you will never thrive if you're constantly looking backwards. You won't. Instead, you've got to look at today, look at the situation you're in, look at the world now and say, for whatever reason, God placed me here now. For a reason. Like, it's so easy to go, oh, I was born in the wrong time period. I should have been born at a different time when things were simpler, when, all of this mess isn't. And how many of us have said that, right? I mean, we wish we were born in a different time period. But the reality is God knew when you were going to be born. In fact, He ordered your days, and He said, yeah, now's a good time for you. God's not surprised by everything that's changed, and you're here for a purpose during this time. Find out what that purpose is and learn to thrive. And that's what we're going to be talking about with all of this. Now, that's not all that's taken from Daniel. As if that's not enough, right? I mean, if we had all of that stripped from us, most of us would be in such a deep depression and everything would be so bad. But then they take it one step farther. Let's look at the next portion. It says, the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. Now, real quick, just a note on that. The Jews had very specific, and many of them still do, very specific dietary laws. They weren't allowed to eat certain things. They couldn't eat bacon. They couldn't eat catfish. God help them. And there was these certain things that they weren't allowed to consume. And all of a sudden he's in a foreign king where guess what? That king doesn't care what your God told you not to eat. I'm going to give you food from my table. Now, most people would be like, food from the king's table? Great. Sounds awesome. Except for it might have been poisoned. Okay? That's one of the bad parts. But all of a sudden now his identity as a Hebrew is being called into question. It's starting to be taken away from him just by the food he's being served. So that's why that portion's important, okay? Because if we don't understand kind of the culture and the history, we might miss that. And that really is a big portion. But let's continue to look. They were educated for 3 years. And at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. And among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And we'll hear more about all of these guys, but Daniel's the one we're really focused on. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. So not only did they have to start eating the wrong food, now they don't even get to keep their names. Their names get changed. Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. Some of those names might ring a bell. We'll talk about their story later. But imagine this. You're about 14 years old. The house of the God that you love and you serve has been ransacked and taken. And all of the wonderful things in there, that's the pride of your nation, the pride of your faith has been ransacked and taken. And then you get taken away to serve a foreign king with foreign gods in a foreign land, away from your family, away from all that you know. And you go and they begin to strip away your identity. That's what's happening. They come in and they change your name. The name that your mother called you is gone. Now you've got a new name. And these names, okay, we don't think about this so much today. But back then, your name identified who you were. Like, think about that, okay? It identified who you were. And all of a sudden, your name, which many of their names paid homage to God, the Creator, the God of Israel and all of these things. And now they're changed to reflect the gods of this new nation. And it's like, so Daniel's religion, his belief system had been stripped and broken. His home had been taken away, and now his identity was taken from him. All the way down to his name was changed. And like, it wasn't even that they looked and said, we just don't know what your name is, so we're going to call you this. No, it wasn't that. It was, oh, that's your name? Not anymore. We're going to give you a different name. Because who you were no longer exists. So, belief system was stripped away. Home was stripped away. And now your very identity was stripped. How in the world do you thrive in an environment that is that hostile to just you existing? Think about it. Think about it. Now you might say, well, I've never had anybody do that. No, but if you've been a Christian for any long amount of time, you've seen how it has changed. The word Christian has gone from being someone who's devoted to Christ to being someone who just identifies as, yeah, Jesus is nice, to now being someone who some people think is a hate group. Like, we've seen that change. I've seen that change. And I'm not that old. I've seen it change. The identity that I identified with all the time growing up, now people are taking it and changing what that means. And if you sit there and you go, how do we thrive in a hostile environment? That's the question. How do we thrive? And we're not going to read the next portion, but I want to encourage you. Go home. If you've got a Bible, read your Bible. Read the first chapter of Daniel, the entire chapter. If you don't have a Bible, grab one of the ones that are in the back of the chairs, okay? Take it home with you. Read the first part of first chapter. Good grief. First chapter of Daniel. Because you see the rest of the story, what happens. Here's what happens, okay? Daniel comes to accept a couple of things. First, he accepts that Jerusalem is no longer home. We don't see him longing to go back. We don't see him crying over it. We don't see any of that. He just accepts where he is. And we've got to do that. We've got to get to a point where we say, God, you've placed me here, this specific portion of time, for a reason. And I accept that. So you got to accept that first portion. Then he looked at his religious system and said, you know what? The system might be gone, but God is not. And we have to look and say, you know what? The way that the church used to be, the way that the people around us used to be, the way that Christianity used to be might be broken from what it was. Might not be the same. But God never changed. He never shifted. His standards yesterday are the same today. His standards 1,000 years ago are the same today. It never changed. God remained the same. So what about the identity? Because the first two he's pretty much accepted. This happened. I've got to change how I view some of the things because he no longer could go sacrifice at the temple. He couldn't do that. That was a key part of what they did. So he accepted that it had changed all of this. But what about the identity part? In the next portion of Scripture, what we see is Daniel talks with his three friends. And he says, guys, let's see if we can get the food changed. And so they go and they do something kind of radical. They go and they say, hey, they go talk to the guy who's in charge and they say, look, we don't want the king's food anymore. We don't want that food. Instead, would you just give us vegetables and water? Is essentially what they said. Just give us vegetables and water. And the guy in charge is like, if you do that, you're going to end up looking sickly. As most of us would think if we only ate vegetables and water. That'd be horrible, right? I need some meat in there somewhere. But, just vegetables and water. He's like, look, you're going to end up being sickly. You're not going to be, you're not going to be healthy. You're not going to be good. You're not going to have all of these things. And then I'm going to have to bring you before the king and look, and you're going to be sickly. And he's going to look at me and say, why are they sickly? And I'm going to say, because I let them eat what they wanted. And then I'm going to get my head cut off, right? I mean, that's what he's thinking. And Daniel says, look, just give us a chance. Just give us a little while. Give us this food, and then compare us with the others. See if we're not healthier. Now, what exactly are they doing in this? Because, can I just say that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not on a diet plan, okay? They were not trying to just eat healthier, to look better, no, it wasn't that. That's not the reason. What they were doing is they were saying, you know what, I'm gonna keep this part of my identity, and I'm gonna follow God. I'm gonna follow what God said and what God put in His Word, and I'm gonna make that my priority and who I am. I'm gonna change what's around me. Now, one thing to notice, they did not go, and this is where a lot of times we get caught up. They did not go to the chief eunuch and said, all this food you've given everybody is going to kill them. It makes them all unclean before God. Everybody needs to stop eating what they're eating, and they need to start eating, just drinking water and vegetables. Everyone needs to change. We do that, right? We go and we say, you know what? This isn't right. People shouldn't be doing this. People shouldn't be doing that. We need to change it all across the board for everybody. If you have a beer, you're going to hell and you need to stop. They need to shut down Budweiser, shut down Coors, whatever. And we go on these rants sometimes and we say that it all has to change and all that. The reality of it is, we just need to be watching ourselves. Okay, here's what I've told people. I've got a way that I believe culture should go that not everybody agrees with. So I'm going to tell you some things about how I think, and if you don't agree with me, that's fine. If you do agree with me, great. Don't write me any nasty emails or letters or anything because of this. When we lived in North Dakota, they were working to pass a law that we already have here in Colorado about no smoking in restaurants, right? Personally, I hate the smell of cigarette smoke. I just don't like it, okay? And Kathy starts almost gagging when she, because there's something about the smell. I just don't like it. And they were trying to pass this thing, and everybody is all on a kick. Yeah, because smoking is bad, so we need to, stop. And it came time to vote, and again, this is where you might disagree with me, but I didn't vote for it. I couldn't. And this is what I told people, because there were some people, and I wasn't exactly quiet about it. Just if I was, I wouldn't be telling all of you right now how I voted those 3-4 years ago. But it was one of those things where I sat there and I said, I don't want people to smoke. I don't want people to drink. I don't want that to happen. But that doesn't mean that I want the bars to be shut down. I do want the bars to be shut down, but I don't think there should be a law in place to prevent it. Instead, I believe that we need to work as Christians to see God invade the lives of smokers and alcoholics and drug addicts, and then they change. Not make it harder for them to do what they want to do anyway. Because the root issue is not that people are smoking in restaurants. Now, it's like I told Kathy at the time. Look, if we go in somewhere and they allow smoking in their restaurant, we just won't eat there. They lost their business. That's okay. They made that choice. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to throw a fit, but my kids are not going to sit in there with cigarette smoke all around them. Okay? That's my choice. But because that's my choice, I don't believe that we should be so focused on getting everybody to look like and to act like Christians when God hasn't done anything in their heart. Here's what Daniel did. Daniel goes to the chief eunuch, the guy in charge of them, and he says, just give me and my friends water and vegetable, and then compare us at the end of the time. That's it. Give us, several weeks, and then see if we're healthier. Now, really what they were saying is, God, we're going to try and be faithful, and we believe that you want a great life for us, and you want good things for us, and that's why you have given us these rules and all of this. And I believe that you don't want to just withhold good things from us. You want us to thrive. You want us to be all that we can in all of this. And so we're going to follow you and trust you for the rest. Because what they were saying is, if it doesn't work, we'll go back to eating the food that stripped our identity. But they come back after several weeks, and the chief eunuch looks at them and looks at the other ones and goes, you guys are healthier. You guys look better than they do. There's something different about you guys. And immediately, they found favor with those who were in charge of them. Here's the takeaway from that story. Culture has changed drastically. Okay? Everything around us is changing. Our home doesn't feel the same. Our faith at times seems to be perceived differently and all of this. And we can look and we can say, man, everything is changing. But don't get caught up in trying to get everybody else out there to change. Instead, make a decision to say, God, I believe you want me to thrive. I believe that you want good things for me. You want me to have the healthiest life I can. You want me to live in such a way that is good and beneficial. So I'm going to follow you. And it's one of those things, you don't have to be obnoxious about it. Okay? Have you ever met an obnoxious Christian? I have. They drive me nuts. Don't be that guy, or that girl. But just say, with me, I'm going to just live the right way. I'm going to live the way that God has called me to live. And the people around you will notice. They're going to notice it. They're going to start asking questions. Why haven't you been divorced? Why haven't you, why aren't your kids, getting drunk on the weekends or all of this? Well, because I model my life after Scripture and what God says, and I do my very best to follow it. I'm not perfect, but here's what I'm trying. Here's what I'm doing. People are looking around. Okay, remember the thrive versus survive mentality? Everybody right now is just surviving. Doesn't matter how much money you got. People are just surviving, and they're looking for a way to thrive. And they want to, and they know that there's more, and they don't know how to get it. And if they see somebody who's figuring it out, who's getting it worked out, who things are going better for them, who you can look at and go, they've got a healthy marriage, their kids are good, they're well behaved, and their business is thriving. What are you doing? What's different? Why? Why is this different? Because you're beginning to thrive because you have made a commitment that your identity is not in a name. Your identity is not in where you live. Your identity is not in any of those things. Your identity is in your relationship to God. And nobody can take that away from you. I've got to tell you, that's the first step. We're in 2017, first day of it. This is the day everyone makes New Year's resolutions. Next week is when everybody has broken them at least once. Okay? Unless you're one of those super crazy disciplined people that keep it every time, in which case the rest of us are annoyed at you the rest of the year. Okay? And it's one of those things, this is the time. Try it. Try it. Say, God, I want to try to follow you. I believe you want good things for me. I believe you want to do. And don't be obnoxious about it. Just say, God, I'm going to take care of right here first. I'm going to look right here. And I'm going to make sure I'm living the way that you have prescribed for me. Now, you might sit here and go, I don't have a clue how to do that. That's okay. That really is, It's one of those things. I want to start working out. I have no idea what I'm going to start doing. Am I going to start at New Year's? No, because everybody else does it right now. Gyms are packed. It's okay to say, I want to see a change in my life, and I don't know how. Ask questions. Look for answers. Explore the possibility. Begin examining it. And then look at the lives of people that you know, based on their lifestyle, not based on title, based on their lifestyle, people you know are believers. And then begin saying, how do I live like that?